All right. Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to be with you today and am very excited for our podcast. So, today we're going to be talking with Dr. Franziska Elmer about the Sargassum Podcast. So, before I tell you more about her, hi, Franziska.
Hi.
This is very fun for me because I met Franziska when I was just getting going with this whole idea of doing an international climate action challenge. And I put the call out for mentors. And Franziska was one of the first people that signed up and said, I'm a marine biologist, but I'm taking a climate sabbatical. And I was like, wait, what and what? and and then to continue on with that, she decided, oh, what the heck? Why don't I also not just help other challengers, but why don't I do a 90-day challenge myself? And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, which kind of led to where we are at the moment. And the exciting news that the podcast just launched yesterday with 3 new episodes. So congratulations! That's so
Thank
cool.
you.
The whole thing
Yes,
of
it is
going
really
from,
cool.
yeah, like a little niggling idea that's like, shouldn't somebody do this, to what the heck, let's just do it. So that's super cool. So let's just start off. Give us a little bit of background of what were you doing up until, I don't know. I think you kind of changed your tack somewhere around 2020, where you decided to change your focus a bit. But before that, what were you doing? What does a marine biologist do?
So before I went on my climate change sabbatical, I was a lecturer. So I was teaching undergrad students about marine ecology, but it wasn't just a normal lecture job as you would expect at a university somewhere working in the office. The two jobs I had for a year and a half were on Caribbean islands. The students we had came for a whole semester and they were living with us at the research station. And whenever possible, we would take them into the water to do teaching and research. So if I taught them fish ID or coral identification, we would spend 1 hour in the classroom so we could actually talk and I could explain to them what to look for. And then we would spend an hour or two in the water showing them the different fish and the corals in the water. Then they get a few days to practice either in the water or with flashcards. And then their test was also in the water. So they had little slates with pencils that they had to write the answers to. And later on, once they got all the skills, Joanne, you are muted.
I want to be in that class. That sounds amazing.
Yes, it was really amazing. And they also got to do their own research project. So they got to spend about 10 days doing field work for their research and then data analysis and then give a presentation and write a report or like a scientific paper type thing. So it's a really intense class, both for the students and for us. It's a lot of work, but you spend so much time in the water and hands-on. It's really, really cool.
Yeah. And what was the name of that program, or those, was it more than one place that you were doing that?
Yes, I first worked for CIE, which is a big study abroad company from the States. And that program was in Bonaire, but they discontinued the program. So our research station got closed, and I took a half year off to go travel. And then afterwards, I worked for School for Field Studies in South Caicos, in the Turks and Caicos Islands.
Mm, very cool. Okay, so that's what you were doing, and then you decided to change course. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so It kind of all started with the 2018 IPCC report. Um, that report came out and it became clear we have to change course. We have to make a huge transition. We got 12 years left. And then you see the responses from our leaders, our political leaders from around the world, and they keep saying this and then say nothing about what they're going to do. And the first person who actually said or became more alarmed was Greta when she came on stage. And so that really changed my perspective. Before I thought, I'm a marine biologist, I do the right thing, I'm working on saving the world. And at the same time, I'm decreasing my ecological footprint, which is actually really hard because you have to travel a lot for our career. So often my ecological footprint was actually higher than my other family members, even though I'm the green person in the family. But I think at that moment I realized our leaders don't have this under control. Normal people need to step up and do something. And I was reading this book called Be More Pirate. And in it asks the question, like, what principle or thing is so important to you that you would fight for it, even if it means like losing your job, losing friends, losing relationships over. And for me, it was clear that I wrote down the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, both of which are extremely threatening for our future and even for my personal future, as it's not going to take that long until we see really bad effects. I mean, we already see them now. And that changed a lot because then I realized I can speak up a lot more because I don't have to be afraid to lose my job if I speak up or anything else. And with my students, I started speaking up to them and told them how much time we have left and is there enough time for them to start working on coral reefs before we lose them? Like for our job, this is actually life-threatening or like job-threatening, even though most coral reef scientists don't act like it, unfortunately. And at one point I realized if I really wanted them to become coral reef scientists, then instead of teaching them how to be coral reef scientists, I needed to spend time now to help solve this crisis and spend more time on it than just in my free time. And that's how I went on this sabbatical.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, that's such a neat idea that if everybody would take, a chunk of their time and understand that no matter what we're doing, if you're working on mental health or food or anything, that the climate, if that doesn't get figured out, and the biodiversity, if that doesn't get figured out, none of this other stuff is really going to matter. So what was your idea then when you came up with the idea for the challenge? So we're talking about the 2020 International Climate Action Challenge. So that during August, people were registering of here's what I'm going to do in 90 days. How did you come up with this idea of doing the Sargassum podcast, which just launched yesterday? So how did that all kind of come together?
So I had the idea in June already, but just kind of in August started working on it because I was working on a virtual conference in June and had to focus on that before starting a new project. Sometimes you have to like tell yourself, yes, this is a cool idea, but let's wait until we finished other things and then we can
Right.
get started on this.
And what was that
And
summit? We should share the name of that. I forget. Was it Reef?
it's called Global Coral Reef Week. And
Okay, I'll put that
it
in the
was
chat too.
part of, yes, it was part of my climate change sabbatical. So August 2019, before COVID hit, a colleague said she doesn't want to travel from Hawaii all the way to Germany for this big coral reef conference. and there's no alternatives to join virtually. So we decided, let's just make a virtual conference. And we did. And of course, COVID probably helped us get boosted, and that other conference actually couldn't take part. So we had over 150 people presenting, and over 2,700 people signed up to listen to the different talks. So that was really cool. And of course,
Yeah.
in that time, it needed all my attention in July.
Yeah.
But then once July was over, I came back to this podcast idea. And
But you already, I mean, just on that Coral Reef Week, I think, like you said, the pandemic probably helped people make the change, but it's I've had the same thing where I've like presented at a conference in the Philippines, and all I did was grab my water and then walk to the computer and log on. And that by having that virtual option, that just made a huge, so you already took a big climate action right there to avoid all that, the
yes,
carbon from travel. Yeah. So okay, so you did that, and
and
then
it's also a very social, equal way of doing
yeah.
conferences, because traveling to a conference and paying for the travel, paying for the accommodation, paying for the registration, which is often several $100s as well, it's not available to everybody. Yes, there's always some grants for students and developing nations, but most people, they can't afford this at all. So we had our conference was free, but even if it costs just a little bit of money, it's so much cheaper. Like we worked for free for the conference, nobody got paid, and we were able to put together this conference for about $1,000. If you think then how much that costs per presenter, it's a bit less than $10 per presenter. How much it costs for the people signed up, it's like less than 50 cents per person signed
Yeah.
up. Compare this to
Yeah.
traveling a place. Like, of course, it's more fun
Exactly.
to meet people in person, but
Right.
the cost benefit, it's so huge and it doesn't get talked about at all.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, that's the same thing we found with the Climate Action Challenge. It was free and it was virtual. And so we had people from, Bangladesh and Indonesia and Zambia and just around the world. But yeah, as you said, there might be opportunities where you can find a scholarship, but in places where it's even difficult to get internet access to even find out about those. So yeah, it's really nice to have those more inclusive exercises. Okay, so sargassum. So so you decided, so you had this idea, like, what the heck's going on with sargassum, or we could do something. So tell us a little bit. Assume we know nothing about sargassum, because I would say 99.5% of people on the planet know nothing about it.
Yes, so sargassum is a macroalgae, so it's a seaweed, and it's very special, or three of the sargassum species are very special as they are never attached to the sea floor. They're always floating on top. They have those little bubbles with air filled, so they're floating on top of the ocean. And until about 2010, 2011, the sargassum would be in the Sargasso Sea. So there's a specific part of the Atlantic called the Sargasso Sea.
Wow,
It's the
I
only
didn't know that.
sea without a coast. And it's in the area around Bermuda and the Bermuda Triangle. So
Huh.
that's where you normally would find the sargassum, and it's called the rainforest of the sea there because there's a lot of animals living in it. It's really important for fish species, and it would travel between there and the Gulf. So people from Mississippi area and the Gulf area may know sargassum a bit because it does travel back and forth, and they sometimes get it on the beach. Then what happened in 2010, 2011 is some of that sargassum moved southwards into the Atlantic conveyor belt, and there it proliferated. So it started reproducing and becoming more and more. And it goes in the summer, so between probably March, April till about October. So not just summer, but mostly summertime is the strongest time. It goes from there both to the West African coast and through like the Southern Caribbean, and then up into the Caribbean to Mexico, to Florida, and causes this huge bloom. So this is a bloom you can see from space. In 2018, it was the biggest macroalgae bloom we've ever had in the world, with about 20,000 tons across the whole Atlantic and Caribbean Sea. And if you're in the Caribbean, there's times when it comes to shore and you're knee high or even hip high in the sargassum. And that's what happened on South Caicos when I was teaching. I just arrived, and about a week or two later, in 2018, we had this big sargassum bloom, and the two hotels on the island were starting to deal with it because, nobody who wants to go on vacation wants this stuff, wants to walk through algae that is smelly and then swim in brown water. So they were starting to take care of it, and I started to survey how it affects the seagrass beds and found that similar to what a colleague found in Mexico, that the seagrass beds pretty much die out because of it. So it has implications for the tourist economy, it has implications for the environment. It is a health hazard with the fumes that come off, the hydrogen sulfide and other heavy metals that decompose. So there's a lot of bad things that come with the sargassum to those islands.
What do you think? What do people think caused it to move from where it was? Is that a climate change kind of difference, or has anybody pinned down why it kind of escaped from its natural home and became this kind of out of control phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, we're still working on that, but the best hypotheses are that it has to do with how the currents were that year. So some currents were not as strong, or some were stronger. So this can be due to climate change, and then also due to temperature. And that's just how it moved. And then once it moved, it multiplied. So to multiply, it needs nutrients. So first, it was thought that all those nutrients come from the Amazon. So the deforestation of the Amazon River brings a lot of nutrients into the ocean, and then the sargassum goes past that outflow, and that definitely has an impact. But they also found that even in the middle of the ocean, there's like upwelling from the deeper sea that brings in those nutrients.
Ah,
So
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, so that may not be due to climate change, but the fact that it started and also the high temperatures are definitely helping this whole phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the sargassum, a third of its biomass is carbon. So it captures a lot of the CO2 that we have in the ocean and in the atmosphere in this biomass, and it brings it to our shores. And that's why sometimes I
Wow.
compare the sargassum to like algae climate activist. Because first of all, algae can be a huge solution for climate change. Like trees, they are absorbing carbon, and they grow a lot faster. So we could use them to do that, and we could do that in the ocean. 70% of our planet is ocean, and we don't really use it. So we can use those desert parts of the ocean to grow algae. And there's a lot less conflict than on land when we want to grow trees and have to figure out what to do with agriculture, what to do with people living and biodiversity and so on. So my idea is that, sargassum wants to put like to tell us, hey, the algae are here. We're here to help. See this carbon we're bringing to your shores. And then, of course, activists are always a bit annoying. So it goes to the shores and then it annoys the tourists, the people who are most responsible for carbon, the Western people
Mm,
who can't travel.
right.
And and all we have to do is pick it up and make products out of it that capture the carbon. Because at the moment we pick it up and we dump it somewhere on the island, and then it decomposes and that carbon goes back into the atmosphere
Right.
without us using it beforehand or capturing it.
So this is what led to the whole Sargassum podcast, right?
Yes.
So the idea of the Sargassum podcast is that you're going to get people together to share these ideas about what the issues are, why it's important, what the solutions are. And I love this too because as we were talking about before, kind of the virtual gathering, that a lot of these places that are impacted are smaller communities that don't necessarily have, research scientists that are able to work together with everybody in the world to figure this out quickly. So you're providing a platform that people can at least know who's got, who's working where and what experts are doing what, so that you could kind of form that network um, of folks. So yeah, so tell us a little bit about the podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast, as I said, I love listening to podcasts, and I think during the pandemic, you get this plethora of webinars, and everybody has Zoom fatigue. And at the same time, I was starting to listen to more podcasts as well, and I can listen to them when I'm cooking or when I'm in the train, or it's a different way of paying attention than during a webinar. You don't
Right.
have to look, you can just listen. Um, there's no many graphs and data that you need to pay attention to and take notes. You learn the story from a person working in the field, but at the same time, I don't think you still learn a lot, because you learn more about their process and what's behind, and you get to know that person. So it's similar to meeting somebody in person at a conference and having a conversation with them. And because we couldn't have in-person conferences, I thought, what we need is a podcast. So that will help all the scientists and all the people involved to get to know each other a bit on an informal basis. But then it's also useful for the local public in the different Caribbean islands to listen to, and it's accessible, while these webinars aren't really accessible to them. Like, they don't know where they are, and they
Yeah, that's a
probably
really good
wouldn't want
point.
to go to them because it's very technical.
Hmm. So that's part of the goal, is to be the translator from the scientist to just a regular person that, yeah, might be a tourist at a hotel that sees it, or might be a person that's a fisherman, or is somehow connected and experiences it, searches and finds you guys, hopefully. I was thinking
Yes.
maybe I'll just go ahead and share the screen so that we can see what you've got as far as your first episodes, because that might help. And again, yeah, for people that are just listening, we'll just describe it. Um, but yeah, so you've got some episodes already going here. Do you want to tell us about them a little
Mhm.
bit?
Yeah, so first three episodes are two in English and one in Spanish. And one is about the art project. So there's about over 30 artists and scientists who are working on the art project about sargassum together.
Cool.
This is the one you just have up. And Vanessa Selk, she uses the about citizen science,
I'm
and the last one is in Spanish.
I'm going to stop the screen share because it seemed to interfere with our signal. So,
Okay.
just to kind of recap, you were saying the first one is about art projects, about artists that they're kind of capturing what's their interpretations of sargassum and what's happening. I think I might have lost you for a second. Okay, I got you again.
Okay. I can see you again.
Yeah. Okay, so the first one was about art projects. The second one is in Spanish. And what's that topic? We might be at the end of our signal. Okay, so I'm going to see, at least I'll be able to show you what the different podcasts are real quick here. So the 3 podcasts, so these are all available now, and it's available on YouTube as well as on Anchor FM. So the first one is an art project with Vanessa Selk. And the next one, let's see. This is one that's in Spanish, and the title is How to Convert Sargassum to a Commercial Opportunity. And so this is kind of following on with what Franziska was saying about how can we convert this instead of a problem into an opportunity. And then the third one, this was kind of cool, is that there's an app called Sargassum Watch. And the idea is that people can use this Sargassum Watch app to report what they're seeing. I think we'll have to listen into the podcast to hear more details about that. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing that. All right, and it looks like Franziska's back on live again. Hi. We knew this might be a bit of a challenge because she's joining from Mexico today. But yeah, that so far at least our connection is good again. So is there anything else that you wanted to say about the podcast before we kind of start our wrap up?
Just ask people to give it a listen. I mean, it should be entertaining even if you aren't interested in sargassum or heard about it for the first time. It's quite an interesting topic, but of course I'm biased because it's something I work on. And if you can, give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. That would really, really help us to get boosted and get other people to find our podcast, and would be super appreciated.
So where all can you find your podcast then?
So we have it published on YouTube if you want to watch the videos. And then we have it published on Anchor. So Anchor is just the website. And from Anchor it goes to Google Podcast, to Apple Podcast, on Spotify. I normally listen to podcasts on Spotify because it's super easy. I can even download them and listen to them offline. Google, Apple, Breaker is on there.
Okay, great. So
pretty much there's a lot of different ones. Okay. Pretty much anywhere where you listen to podcasts, it's probably on there.
Yeah, but you're right. Apple is the one that if you can listen on Apple and give it a review, that will really help boost it. It's kind of once it starts getting recognized a little bit, then it's more likely to get a little bit more attention. So that sounds great. All right. And so, Franziska, what about people that might be, this is, this is something we talked about earlier at the end of the Climate Action Challenge, but somebody that has an idea like you, and isn't sure where to start, like how, it wasn't that many months ago you didn't have a podcast and now you do. So what would you recommend to people? What's your advice if they have a little bit of an idea but they're thinking, well, probably somebody else could do this? What would you say?
Can you repeat the question, because I couldn't hear you that well because of the connection?
Okay. What is your advice to someone who would like to start something? Did you hear it?
To someone who wants to start a podcast?
Or just anything? Any kind of project? Did it cut out again?
Yes, but I think, did you ask me advice for somebody who wants to start a podcast? Is that it?
Or anything. Or anything.
Or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the most important part is to get started, find a team, because with a team it's definitely more fun, and most of the projects you cannot do on your own. You need other people with other skills to really be good at this, and try to find people that are a bit different from you, who have different networks, who have different skills, because that helps, rather than just go with people who think exactly like you, which may be easier to get on the same page. But at the same time, I think having diversity in your team helps make the project in the end very good. And this is scientifically proven with studies. So don't be afraid of having a diverse team with a lot of different skills in it. And then early on, think about different partners you can have, because now for the podcast, this is super important. We need people to interview. We need people who can boost our podcast, who will talk about it on social media. We need other podcasts we can go to. We need other news areas where we can broadcast the podcast. Luckily, I'm part of a lot of societies and email listservs, as we are as scientists. It's quite common to do that and be on them. So I can send an email to 5,000 people working on corals and 500 people working on sargassum and advertise it. But if you don't have that, maybe find some partners, some NGOs or something around you that have these kind of capabilities. Because in the end, even if you have a great project, if nobody knows about it, it will die. And this is very true for a podcast. Like, advertising is a huge part of it, but also for anything else. Like, it will become way more efficient and effective if people know about what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you guys have an important partner, what is it, Marine Conservation Without Borders? What was?
Yes, Marine Conservation Without Borders is the organization from one of my co-hosts, and they have a really big social media following all over Mesoamerica, and their project is just really awesome. What they do is they take indigenous ecological knowledge and Western scientific knowledge and merge it together in a book. They have a mangrove book, and they're working on other books about marine conservation, marine ecosystems. And this is because he was living with the indigenous family in Belize, and he realized they do well in school, but when there's subjects that the books are all in English, then they're having a problem, because their first language to talk about these things is not English, it's Mayan or their indigenous language.
Mm-hmm.
So his goal is for everybody to have a science book in their first language.
Wow.
So
Great
he
idea.
makes these science books, which are two bilingual, so they will always be in the language of the school and the indigenous language that the kids speak. So even if the teacher doesn't speak Mayan, you can have class together and the kids can read it in Mayan and in English, and that will improve their English or their
Wow.
language skills, or in Mayan and Spanish, depending on where they are. And at the same time, they have the words in their own language. And this will enable these languages to become a language that can be used in science, in laboratories, in conservation, because sometimes they even have to make words for stuff that doesn't exist in that language yet.
Right.
So he
Right.
works with people who translate into these indigenous languages. He doesn't speak any of them properly, but it's a really, really cool project he's working on
That is,
as well.
especially because language, you speak dozens of languages, I think, but the little I've been exposed to living in Korea and Saudi Arabia is that each language has its own, it it embodies the concepts, like a way of thinking as well. And I would imagine
Mm-hmm.
that the indigenous way of just being so much closer to nature, that there's probably a lot of wisdom that's embodied in the language itself that could inform these other languages like English that may not have as much of a connection to some of those um, those relationships to nature. So that's super cool. Well,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, I'm so proud of you. Like you're just like, I mean, it's just a great story for me to when I was writing the book Climate Action Challenge, and I had these concepts of forming a team, getting partners, studying exemplary models, all this, giving yourself a timeline, all these things. But I I'd seen it work personally, but it was just like so rewarding to just put it out there in the world and see you signing up from Switzerland and working with your international team, as well as we said, people that were like Deb's Ree doing her organic, growing organic gardens from kitchen scraps with friends in Australia and Canada. And um, so anyhow, it's really neat to see you taking those basic principles and just walking through the steps and doing it, and things like having a team, having partners, and pushing yourselves to just set a deadline and do something. You
Yes,
figure it out as
the
you go.
deadline is really important because otherwise you just keep on dragging on and not getting anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah.
right. Meetings, deadlines, all that stuff that just kind of push you to get something done and focus. So
Yeah, and also like looking at examples because I've never done a podcast. I'm not a journalist. I've listened to some. So really talking to other people who've done podcasts, who are podcasting, and just listening to a bunch of different podcasts and writing down what do we like, what do we not like. That was super important part of our process before we started actually recording and doing a podcast, like really analyzing what is it, what do we need to do, how do we do these things.
yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's another step in that process that I've figured out too, and that's one of those earlier processes, is identify 10 exemplary models and then figure out, like, how did they do this, who's funding them, who's listening to them, what's their format. You just get yourself way up on the learning curve, so maybe you're at 90% rather than zero when you actually start working on yours, which is super helpful when you're trying something completely different. All right. Okay. So we've got the links there in the notes for where you can find everything, and definitely go take a listen. follow them, subscribe to them on YouTube, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and spread the word to people that you might know. And if you think about it, you probably do know some folks. Like I've got some family that lives in St. John in the Virgin Islands, so I'll make sure that they know about it. There's some small environmental community groups on those islands, so let's help get the word out there and help these guys get their message out to the world. All right, thanks so much, Franziska, for joining us.
Thank you, Joanne. That was really fun.
Yeah, that was great. All right, well, bye everybody, and remember, the time for action is now, because there is no planet B. See you soon. Bye.